Okay, so Adeyinka will be presenting a paper on determining the relative importance of corporate governance framework elements for technology firms in Nigeria using the analytic hierarchy process model. And the paper, incidentally, is authored by me and him. So Adeyinka will be doing the presentation. So Adeyinka, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Professor Bolajoko for introducing me to AHP. About a year now, I'm a student at the University of Lagos, Nigeria, where I'm studying for my doctorate in business administration. And in the course of my 3 years, which I'm wrapping up in 2 months, she introduced me to AHP, and I found it very fascinating as a decision-making tool. And I thought we should, take this to businesses across Africa, really, where people, do not apply scientific, methods to make decisions, but rather maybe, other emotional or, other methods. So we're interested in how to use multiple criteria decision making to solve real problems in organizations, basically. And this study is focused on corporate governance and how this impacts performance in organizations. Corporate governance definitely has been topic for research in Nigeria for several years, and it's been a key factor to determine performance. However, there's a number of internal and external factors that defines the elements of corporate governance framework that must be in place to achieve organizational performance. This study will try to apply AHP to determine the relative importance of corporate governance framework elements that will help improve performance of technology firms in Nigeria. Going to introduction, the concept of corporate governance started to gain international attention with the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008. And these failures were attributed to accounting and financial, control of the failings, accounting and financial control. And in some cases, outright corruption. Therefore, this points to the absence of corporate governance framework elements that we're trying to establish. World Bank and IMF also established this to guide organization performance. CGFEs, which is corporate governance framework elements, are supposed to be adhered to by organizations. And like we said, in most cases, in the technology environment in Nigeria, there's supposed to be specific context for these elements to be able to guide performance. And therefore, AHP can help these organizations to do this. Literature review. We looked at a couple of literature with respect to this subject. Although corporate governance mechanisms and practices are considered entrenched in large corporations, they are not well entrenched in small companies, SMEs, particularly technology companies in Nigeria as a result of sharp growth trajectory seen in technology sector in Nigeria. There's been no better time in history than now for corporate governance to be more entrenched. So what we have done, because there's no one size fits all when it comes to determining the framework for effective corporate governance, we've selected through research key corporate governance framework elements for this study. The first is board structure. And board structure refers to certain sub-criteria. First of the sub-criteria under board structure is size of board, independence of board, diversity of board, and CEO duality. So you have these 4 sub-criteria under the board structure as a criteria for study. The second criteria is ethics and compliance, under which you have the sub-criteria of code of ethics, board oversight, compliance training, and monitoring and evaluation. The third one, regulatory framework, and under that you have applicable laws, internal policies and procedure, board committees, reporting and communication, while the final criteria for study is transparency and accountability. And under that you have financial reporting, board accountability and compliance, shareholder engagement, internal control and audit. And that's the reference for selecting these 4 criteria for this study. The objective is to determine the relative importance of corporate governance framework elements, which we've looked at just now, that will help improve the performance of technology firms in Nigeria while using the AHP model. For this research, the research design, this study adopted cross-sectional survey research design using AHP model-based quantitative approach. The population of this study consists of 269 technology companies registered as members of the FinTech Association of Nigeria. So for this research, just to emphasize, we partnered with an association where 269 technology companies are members to be able to carry out this study. The sample size will be 30 respondents who are heads of departments of technology firms that are members of this association, and we use the multi-stage sampling technique to carry out this study. Source of data, we use both primary and secondary data. Of course, primary data was the administration of questionnaires to heads of department of these companies, while secondary data was obtained from desk research, literature review sources. The research instrument, we use the semi-structured questionnaire in 3 parts, and of course, we did the data analysis using coded and analyzed descriptive statistics. Now let's go straight to AHP. To describe this, I'm going to go to the model, to our model, which is on this page. Of course, the goal is to determine relative importance of corporate governance elements in the technology companies that we studied. Like I said earlier, we used 30 respondents from 30 different organizations. Our criteria stated earlier: cost structure, ethics and compliance, regulatory frameworks, transparency and accountability. You have the top criteria listed under the relevant criteria there. Now, we used the SATI's relative importance scale, which we all know about. We designed our questionnaire and we're able to guide. I'm so sorry, this is not very clear. We use our instruments and we're able to guide respondents adequately on how to administer or how to fill in the questionnaires. You can see the sample. We've asked them to circle the relevant portion of the questionnaire of this study. I'm going to just use this example, which is question 1 on the instrument, because we asked them to compare the relative importance of the following corporate governance framework elements with respect to the goal. And therefore, on the left, you have, on the x-axis, you have the criteria, and on the other side, you have the sub-criteria. We're trying to look for pairwise analysis here, and they're supposed to circle the one that is more important, whichever way as they observe in the organizations. When we did this, we then took the analysis into Excel sheets, the responses from our respondents, and we plugged this into the Excel sheets and came up with this analysis for the 5 questions that we asked. And then we did the geometric mean that gave us one single value that we then entered into the super decision model. In terms of result and model analysis, like I said earlier, 30 instruments were administered. All were completely filled and returned, resulting in response of 100%. Respondents' characteristics, findings revealed the respondents' gender to be 50% male, 50% female, 21 to 40 years of age, 80%, mostly married at 43.3%, and all are graduates with at least BSc or equivalent, and earning between 500,000 to a million Nigerian naira, which is 70%. Now, the model, in terms of consistency index, judgments of the respondents were consistent and acceptable because the consistency ratio of all the pairwise comparison matrices were below 0.1. In terms of composite priorities, the priorities for the relative importance of corporate governance framework elements and the sub-criteria are as presented in the table below. So the 5 questions that we are focusing on, you will see that for table 1, the pooled average composite priorities and relative importance ranking of the corporate governance framework element by head of departments of technology firms in Nigeria. The index, the CI, is 0.089, and this shows that the respondents of the opinion that the corporate governance framework elements of board structure, table 1 deals with board structure as the criteria for corporate governance framework element, and then we looked at the other criteria as well, comparing board structure with ethics and compliance, and regulatory framework and compliance on the other hand, while transparency and accountability was also compared. And in the ranking, as determined by this study, we saw that board structure became ranked as number 1 in terms of what is most important to the respondents, who are all in the technology industry in Nigeria, followed by ethics and compliance, and then regulatory framework and compliance, and transparency and accountability, ranking number 4 out of 4. This tells us a lot, because it then means that in the industry in Nigeria, what is important to them is just the structure of their board, and all those other factors are of less consequence in the scheme of things. So we then went further to look at board structure and the sub-criteria of board structure, to rank them, to see which of these sub-criteria under board structure are considered important or the most important as per the ranking. Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we may hear you.
Okay, all right. So under the board structure criteria, we discovered that size of board is most important, ranked number 1. Board independence, so followed by CEO duality, which is ranked number 2 at the end of the table, and board independence is next, ranked third. Board diversity is ranked fourth out of 4. We then looked at the criteria of ethics and compliance and then took the sub-criteria under that and studied all of that to see what sub-criteria under ethics and compliance are more important or most important to these respondents. We found code of ethics ranking number 1, board oversight ranking number 2, compliance training 3, monitoring and evaluation 4. Same for regulatory framework and compliance, where applicable laws ranked number 1, internal policies 2, board committees 3, reporting and communication 4, and finally, we looked at transparency and accountability, and the sub-criteria under that are just 3 sub-criteria. Financial reporting ranks first, board compliance next, and internal control ranks number 4. Now, what are our conclusions from these findings? We've looked at the rankings, which are just summarized here. With respect to the board, the sub-criteria that have been looked at, board structure sub-criteria shows that the size of board is more important than the CEO duality, which is ranked next. Board independence next, and then diversity ranked last. We talked about all of this, so I'm going to just move quickly because I've summarized all of this in the presentation. Now, what does this mean in terms of interpretation of this study using AHP? Based on this, it is recommended that technology firms in Nigeria should take advantage of regulatory provisions for size of board, in particular, which is the first sub-criteria that they consider important, as well as CEO duality by the regulatory authorities, since both are ranked under the board structure criteria. They can also adopt the principles of ethics and compliance, particularly code of ethics, which is also ranked number 1, and this will impact positively on their reputation, thereby improving their chances of attracting, investments. Finally, they should imbibe transparency and accountability, which they do not consider important during this research. They should consider transparency and accountability in their activities to all stakeholders so that they can enjoy trust and loyalty, since stakeholders will respond positively to these principles. What are the limitations?
Hello. Yes, because I have to cut you off because time is actually up. Just round up in the next 10 seconds.
Yeah, this is my last slide. The main limitation of this study is the shortage of scholarly research with direct practical and local significance with respect to corporate governance framework elements. The research overcame these limitations by getting practical information from key stakeholders. Like I said earlier, we partnered with the FinTech Association of Nigeria to be able to do this study. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yinka. Thank you for your presentation. Our time is actually wrapping up, but do we have questions for him, please?